my name is Attorney Walter, if not the third, with Disability Resolution PM. I'm going to try and make this video as quickly as possible, but it is urgent, and it is huge, and it is extremely, extremely scary. I need you to understand what this information is at the most basic level so that you understand what it will become in a timeline fashion going forward. Number one, there is, as you know, a moratorium going on when it comes to evicting people from houses because of the situation with COVID. Like, you know, they can't pay, so we're not evicting them. That's the moratorium. Moratorium, the definition is a temporary prohibition of an activity. So basically, people who own places can't evict people from those places if they were affected by COVID, right? So what this comes down to is this, and I know that you're not going to understand some of the stuff related to it, but I just want to make it very clear. Judiciary, federal court rules, CDC's COVID-19 eviction moratorium is unlawful. July 23rd, 2021, Jack Phillips, written by Jack Phillips. Specifically, let's read through it, and then I'll kind of explain a little bit more about what's going on. But the bottom line is, this is huge. This isn't like fourth stimulus huge. This is like much bigger than that. Let's take a look. A federal court on Friday ruled that the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, overstepped its authority by halting evictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. So basically, a federal agency, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, overstepped its authority by halting evictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. What that means is that that agency created law, and that law should not have been created by that agency because agencies don't create law. Presidents usually can't create law for the most part, but they're allowed to do executive agreements and they're allowed to do executive orders. Executive orders are for the United States. Executive agreements are between America and other countries. The Cincinnati, so basically the only people who can create law in that sense are supposed to be essentially the legislators, the House and the Senate. But then, of course, the Supreme Court, which is not really supposed to make law in itself too, does make law by basically reshaping whatever was there. So nobody's really supposed to make law but the senators and the legislators, except everybody does. All right, so here we go. They're saying that this agency, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, which actually I had to interact with one time because I ate bad chicken in Boston. I got a really bad infection of Camelobacter. Anyways, cute side story. Let's keep reading. They're saying that the CDC overstepped their ability to go ahead and create law when they're not really a create law agency. They're a, follow the direction of what the legislator gives them agency. The Cincinnati-based U.S. Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals unanimously agreed with the lower court ruling that said the CDC engaged in federal overreach. They were doing too much beyond their power with the eviction moratorium, with allowing people to not get evicted, which the agency has consistently extended for months. So, people weren't getting evicted because they couldn't work and they couldn't pay for their, yada yada, so the rent, so people were not evicted and they were allowed to continue to live there. Several weeks ago, the CDC announced it would allow the policy, which was passed into law by Congress, to expire at the end of July. But then everybody's wondering, how the heck did CDC just magically create this rule when they don't have legislative powers? It is not our job as judges to make legislative rules that favor one side or another. Let's read it again. It is not our job as judges. It ain't their job to make legislative rules, right? So it's the judges are saying, hey, this isn't our gig. This isn't our thing. We're not supposed to be doing this, right? It is not our job as judges to make legislative rules, right? It's not our job. And that's important because what they're saying there is it's the Senate and the House's job to come up with this what the CDC came up with if the Senate and the House wanted it to present it to the president. Let's go back. It is not our job as judges to make legislative rules that favor one side or another. The judges wrote, but nor should it be the job of the bureaucrats embedded in the executive branch, the White House. While landlords and tenants likely disagree on much, there's one thing both deserve: for their problems to be resolved by their elected representatives, the House and the Senate. Okay. The ruling upheld one handed down by the U.S. District Judge Mark Norris, who in March blocked enforcement of the moratorium throughout Western Tennessee. Okay. So basically there was a district judge. So remember, it's a federal level: district, circuit, supreme, appellate stuff. And this U.S. District Judge, Mark Norris, said, no, they're not allowed to do the moratorium. No. People will just have to get evicted. And the higher court above the district said, well, we think he's right. We think the district court judge is right. Next paragraph. Under the moratorium, tenants who have lost income during the pandemic can declare under penalty of perjury that they've made their best effort to pay rent on time. The CDC claimed the measure was necessary to prevent people from having to enter overcrowded conditions if they were evicted, which would, according to the agency, impact public health. Right, so if everybody gets evicted, that's not a good situation, because then you have everybody going to the homeless shelters, and those things are pretty much overloaded as it is right now. So the bottom line is, even if you didn't have COVID, there wouldn't be enough people to be able to go to those homeless shelters. Previously, the CDC's lawyers argued in court filings that Congress authorized the eviction freeze as part of its COVID-19 relief legislation, while simultaneously asserting that the moratorium was within its authority. Well, it was never within their authority. We all know that. But can they piggyback off of this act that was passed by Congress? Those arguments were rejected by the 3-panel appeals court on Friday. What's the difference between executive branch experts and congressional ones? The executive branch experts make regulations. Congressional experts make recommendations. The appeals court wrote, congressional bureaucracy leaves the lawmaking power with the people's representatives, right where the founders put it. Let's read it again, because I know that was a lot. What's the difference between executive branch experts, right, and congressional ones? So you got the White House people and you got the House and Senate people. Executive branch experts make regulations, how they regulate how the rules are going to be made or followed, rather, right? Congressional experts make recommendations. Essentially, they're recommending what rules we should have. Not that that's exactly clear, but we'll keep going. The appeals court wrote, congressional bureaucracy leaves the lawmaking power with the people's representatives, the House and the Senate, right where the founders put it. Because so the people who signed the Constitution, the Declaration of the Independence, all these extremely important documents, they intended for there to be a group of senators and a group of House reps, right? You have the Lords and the House people. They intended them to be essentially the creators of basically the law of the land. And they didn't want to vest too much power into the executive king, if you will, which is essentially what the president is, although it's just for 4 years, potentially 8 years. So what they did was they limited the king's power to having the power of the pen, the signature, to put it in place. But the bottom line is, essentially, the king, or if you will, the president, will be limited by this signing power so that the House of Representatives and the Senate can do the heavy lifting of actually figuring out what the laws are going to be going forward. Okay? But last month, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, rejected a different plea by landlords to end the ban on evictions. Interesting. Justice Brett Kavanaugh had written in an opinion that while he believes that the CDC had exceeded its authority by implementing the moratorium, he voted against ending it because the policy is set to expire July 31st. So that is a big judge or justice trick, which is it's just going to become moot of an argument anyways trick. You don't usually see that in a lot of the lower courts, because that's all in the lower courts, everything's like, it's just happening right now, or it just happened, because you're suing, you're in the trial courts, and it's just all just happened, right? The 911 call was just 2 months ago, even though it's probably longer than that. By the time you get to the Supreme Court, it usually takes years, which is what happened in this situation. You got to go through all these appellate courts, and then you got to make it to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court sat back and said, well, whatever, it's going to be moot soon, July 31st. We're weeks away from that. So, there you go. Those few weeks, he wrote, will allow for additional and more orderly distribution of the funds that Congress has appointed to provide rental assistance to those in need because of the pandemic. Okay? So what he was saying there was he was not creating law. He was merely allowing it to continue because in a couple of weeks, the purpose of the whole lawsuit would become moot. Was that smart? Yeah, it was probably smart as a public policy thing. Was that creating law? No, it was just allowing law to continue. Was it, hurting the landlords? Yeah, it was probably hurting the landlords, because then it validated that this moratorium could continue for the time that it did. But I don't think that this would completely stop the landlords from continuing to file suit to go ahead and try and have some sort of, payment from that time from the government or the people that were renting those, places. I don't think it would stop them from still trying to get funds for all that time that they weren't getting paid. The way a lot of people do this whole housing thing is they'll take out a loan, they'll pay the monthly fees for their mortgage on it, and then people renting it will pay the person paying the mortgage, and they take the money from the people who are in it as rent. Boom, they've got it. They say, okay, there's my mortgage. They hand it over to the bank, and then everybody's happy. People get to rent it. The people who are basically, building equity in a home by taking their rent, maybe putting a little on top, or maybe not even, maybe getting a little cash on top of that, of the mortgage, they pay the bank and life continues. Those are called smart people. I unfortunately never did that, but I will one day, hopefully. Distribution of the funds that Congress has appropriated. Okay, so bottom line, he said, just let it continue. The CDC moratorium has faced pushback from property owners as well as the National Association of Realtors. So basically, the National Association of Realtors are saying, hey, wait a minute. If you just let all these people live in these houses, people can't sell these houses and they can't re-rent them to other people. And how are these landowners going to actually get paid? Landlords have been losing over $13 billion every month under the moratorium, and the total effect of the CDC's overreach may reach up to $200 billion if it remains in effect for a year, said the organization in an emergency petition to the Supreme Court. So what's happening is they're taking this appellate ruling and they're shoving it up to the Supreme Court and looking for further clarification. It's not clear if the CDC's attorneys will appeal the ruling. So bottom line, what's happening is the moratorium has occurred. The Supreme Court allowed it to continue. But now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of, was it really legal? Now we have one appellate court that's saying, okay, they overreached, right? Which makes sense. And then we have Kavanaugh saying, but that's okay. But then what this comes down to is, are they going to extend it? July 31st, I mean, guys, that's weeks away. There's a lot of people out there living in a house that they're not paying for right now, living in an apartment that they're not paying for right now. So if this appeals claim goes up to the Supreme Court, we could see the Supreme Court turn around and say, no, they had their time, everybody's out after July 31st. Now, the Supreme Court tends to, in these situations, allow the legislator to jump in. But as you've probably noticed, the legislators have not been very quick to do anything ever since that third stimulus came out. Oh, we're trying to come to a decision. Oh, we have this third-party bipartisan group in the middle that's working away with us. I wonder how much that third-party bipartisan group is getting paid, but they're working it. They're really, really working it. It's just a think tank in the middle. But my point to you guys is this, that came up with something that the Republicans were never going to sign anyway, so I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, my point about this is, let's talk about the timeline of the future here. This goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court then has to look at issues pertaining to who's going to get paid, when are they going to get paid, are people going to get evicted after July 31st, is the moratorium going to continue, does President Biden have the ability to go ahead and just write, they won't look at that, but I'm sure that will pop up because it's going to have to. Can there just be an executive order to go ahead and continue it? If the CDC doesn't have the power, then the legislator, being the House and the Senate, will have to come out with something rather immediately. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know one thing. Evicting that many people, that equates to billions and billions, $13 billion every month. $13 billion to these landlords is being lost every month. And my point to you about this is that this is just going to grow. And then who's going to pay for that? Because somebody's got to pay for that, right? I mean, the people living in these houses for free right now, sure, they're in a bad situation. But equally sure, the person who owns the property that can't pay the mortgage is now also in a bad situation. And that's when you kind of look at the basics of contract law. You have basically an offer, right? Offer. Acceptance. I accept your offer, and consideration. You have the offer, acceptance, and the consideration. Something for something. And the problem is the something for something part of this, the consideration. There's no consideration here for being able to stay in those homes, which means that we then have to look at, this is a act of God situation, right? So let's say there's a sun flare and everybody has to stay inside their home and can't go to work or can't do anything, and it ruins all the electronic devices for a month, right? Who pays for that month? What do we do? Tough question. Let's say that there's a situation where there's a toxic spill, right? And people can't leave where they're currently living. The whole place has to be cleaned. They can't do their work properly. They're in masks, whatever. Similar kind of idea to COVID, except COVID's more like you can't see it, you don't know what to do, yada, yada. You put a mask on and you hope for the best. So, and then some of you would say, well, if you got the vaccine, that's choice. You have the choice to do that. You have to be fair to those people who want to choose to not get it. You have to allow them to do that. That is called freedom. If you get all spunky about basically saying, oh, well, those people are terrible, horrible, backwards, evil people. Well, the actual only terrible, backwards, awful person is the person that's saying that. You can't force somebody to get a vaccine. You can't. Right now it's about COVID, but let's be very clear. They could come out with something else that's maybe not so healthy for you that they would force you to take, and then all of a sudden you wouldn't have the same functional capacity. And let's call like it is as well. With the COVID vaccine, there are people who have very negative results from it, and even people who died from it. So I just want to warn you guys, when it comes to these evictions, be aware that the courts are stirring right now. And the Supreme Court, I don't think, wants to get caught in the middle of all this stuff. So what's likely to happen is the Supreme Court will shove a lot of this off onto the legislators. But the legislators aren't making a lot of movement from what I've seen right now for what's going to happen with this moratorium. I have some more videos that are coming out what their position is, but I just wanted to give you the judicial side of what they're doing so that you understand it a little bit better, because this is potentially very scary stuff. And I just want you to think big picture. What happens when we evict that many people? What happens when we have $200 billion that are due to people who own these places? You can't just say, so sorry, so sad. People have to be able to have some semblance of the life they had related to it. And that's another thing. Maybe we just need to be smarter about our money as a country and put aside like an insurance thing, beyond what we already have. We have an insurance thing for storms. We have an insurance thing for warfare. We don't have an insurance thing for a pandemic. We were not prepared in all the ways that we should have been, And that was across the board. Remember the ventilators? Remember the vast mask shortage? Remember the ventilators, masks, all kinds of things. The lack of blood, lack of all kinds of stuff. We just weren't prepared. I think that this is interesting because now we have the new Delta variant coming out, which isn't even that new. And now they're starting to show studies overseas that the Delta variant it still works on people who are vaccinated. They had a chunk of people who got very sick who were vaccinated with different vaccines from the Delta variant. So, and we're starting to see conflicting data between essentially the CDC and what other countries are coming out with. Just as a side thing, I think the United States does a great job with healthcare, even though we all know that the major drug companies don't come out with cures because they just want to go ahead and prolong essentially treatment. But if you really want to look to, in my opinion, some of the best medicine in the world, you want to look to Israel. Israel has some of the best medicine treatments, some of the best medicine cures, some of the best medical machines. They have all of that stuff, and it's incredible. I've seen some of my more wealthy to-do friends go there for issues that they've had in America that they could not get cured, and they're now... And I'm not going to go into that because it's something that is private to them, but they're now going through a process where some of the test results are coming back negative, which is mind-friggin' blowing. But again, just if you want to check something out, maybe check out the state of Israel when it comes to medical treatment. Not for all the other stuff like the wars going on there and all that. This is not the channel for that. But for medical purposes, obviously a disability channel, you might want to look into that. Okay? Guys, I will catch you a little bit later. I just wanted to give you a little heads up as to something that's a storm that's brewing in the judicial system. Have an absolutely wonderful day. I will catch you a little bit later, and we'll go from there. Remember, I go live from 8 to 10 p.m. every Thursday. And also remember, it's live on YouTube, 8 to 10 Eastern Standard Time every Thursday. I will catch up with you a little bit later, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.